In this video, we'll be talking about process costing. Process costing is a costing system that's used for homogeneous products. So you can see here, homogeneous means that every unit is the same as every other unit. So, for example, you would use process costing for oil. If you produce oil, like olive oil, and you only make one type of olive oil, process costing would be appropriate. Another example of process costing would be bottling water. If you bottle water and you have only one size of water that you manufacture, every bottle is the same as every other bottle, then process costing would be appropriate. So we can say that process costing is used for mass-produced, identical, low-cost products. And we can also say that for process costing, we use more averaging. The reason why we use more averaging is because if every unit is identical, if every unit is exactly the same, then it makes sense to use process costing. Because if every unit is the same as every other unit, then averaging means that if I take the average represents what each individual unit is. Let me give you an example. Let's say that everybody in the class gets 100% on an exam. So everybody is the same. Everybody is identical. If everybody gets 100% on an exam, what's the average score? It's 100%. So you can see if everything is the same, then averaging makes more sense. So that's why we have Chapter 16, which is process costing. The most important thing in Chapter 16 is to understand the concepts and then also understand a production cost report. So what we'll do is we'll talk about the important concepts that you need to know for this chapter, and then we're going to go over a production cost report problem. If you can do a production cost report problem, then you can solve any problem in this chapter. So let's begin. First thing you need to know is that process costing uses more than one work in process account. When we did job order costing, we saw that job order costing uses only one work in process account. Now with process costing, we use more than one. So for example, we might have work in process number 1, and then work in process number 2, and work in process number 3. So for process costing, you would have a work in process account for each process or each step. So for process costing, maybe we do like machining here, then maybe we do painting, and then packaging. So there would be more than one work in process account. Also, know that work in process means that everything is done at a constant rate. Okay, so that's very important. So for example, if everything is done at a constant rate, if I have 15 units and each one is 20% complete, it means that all 15 units are 20% complete. Okay? So each one of these units are 20% complete. All right, let's take a look at this example here. Okay, so here's an important example. Let's talk about equivalent units. Okay, so let's look at this here. Okay, let's say that I have 2 physical units. Okay, so if I have 2 physical units and each one is 50% complete, right, then how many finished units do I have? Okay, so I'll write this here. So we have 2 physical units, and each one is 50% complete. Okay. So in that case, how many completed units do I have? Well, the answer is 0. 0 because nothing is completed. We have 2 physical units, but each one is only 50% done. So how many completed units do I have? It's 0. How many equivalent units do I have? Well, let's see. I have 2 physical units. Each one is 50% complete. And remember, we're doing process costing, so that means that every unit is the same as every other unit. So two 50% units, that's equivalent to 1 unit. Okay? So you can see that equivalent unit is different from physical units, and it's different from completed units. Equivalent units means how many pretend finished units we have. Okay, so equivalent units, we can see here, is physical units times percent completion. Another example, let's say I have 4 physical units, and each one is 50% complete. How many completed units do I have? 0. If I have 4 physical units and each one is only 50% complete, I actually have no completed units. But how many equivalent units would I have? The answer is 2. So you can see, again, in this chart here, we have 2 physical units. Each one is 50% complete. So that's equivalent. That means we have 1 equivalent unit. Okay, next thing you need to know is that every product has 3 ingredients. Okay, so every product includes 3 costs. Remember, these 3 costs are called total manufacturing cost, or we call them product cost. Every product has direct materials. We're going to call that materials cost. And how do you convert your materials into a final product? Well, you have to have people working on the product. We call that labor. And you have to have all of your other costs. We call that manufacturing overhead. So what is direct labor and manufacturing overhead cost called together? We call that conversion cost. So what are the 2 product costs that we have? Well, the 2 product costs are materials and conversion cost. All right, so let's take a look here. Okay, so this is a graphic depiction of what we're going to be doing. Okay. So what we're going to be doing is the following. All right, so we have total cost divided by total completed units. Okay, so for example, let's say that my total cost was $10. Let's pretend this was $10. And I finished making 10 units. How much does it cost to make each unit? What's $10 divided by 10? It would be $1. Well, isn't completed unit kind of the same as equivalent unit, right? So you can see here, right here, that I have total cost divided by total number of equivalent units. And then what I do is I split this into 2 things. So here, I take total material cost. In other words, I only take the cost that I incur or the cost that I have for materials, and then I divide by equivalent units for materials. In other words, if I only think about materials, how many equivalent units, how many units could I make only with the materials that I have? Here, I take total conversion cost, that's labor and overhead, and I divide it by the total equivalent units for conversion cost. So you can see that I'm just taking what I have here and then putting all the material stuff on the left side and all the conversion cost stuff on the right side. So hopefully this makes a little bit of sense conceptually. Once we do a problem together, it'll make a lot more sense. Now, I mentioned that the most important thing to be able to do is make a production cost report. Okay, so here we have the steps for making a production cost report. So to make a production cost report, you're going to figure out physical units first. Then you're going to figure out equivalent units second. You'll figure out unit cost third. And then you're going to assign the cost last. That's the 4th step. Okay, let's take a look at page 4, and here is an example of a problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how much it costs to make 1 unit, and then we're going to figure out how much money we spent to produce our units this month, how much is our ending work in process worth, right? So we're going to make a production cost report. Remember, a production cost report has 4 different steps. So take a look at this example, and we're going to go over the 4 steps together. Let's take a look at this production cost report example. So let me explain a couple things here. It says work in process March 1st, so that's the beginning of the month. At the beginning of the month, they have 20,000 physical units. Okay, so they start working on 20,000 units. And they have 100% of the materials. So all the materials are there. But they've only done 10% of the conversion cost work. They've only done 10% of the labor, 10% of the overhead. This is how much money they've spent so far. During the month, they start working on 30,000 units, and they complete and transfer out 40,000 units. Finally, at the end of the month, that's March 31st, they have 10,000 units, 100% of the materials, and 50% of the conversion cost. So I want to point out that materials are always 100%. Okay, so if materials are not 100%, then how can you do anything, right? So for example, if you're going to cook a dinner, how can you cook anything if you don't have all the materials available, right? So we're going to assume that materials are always 100%. So based on the information here, we're going to go ahead and start working on the 4 steps. Okay, so the first step is to reconcile physical units. And that means to figure out how many units you have at the beginning, how many units you start working on, how many units you complete, how many units are left over at the end. So I want to point out that this number here, total units to account for, is 50,000. Total units accounted for is 50,000. These two numbers are always the same. Okay. So make sure you know that this number here is always the same as this number here. Okay, so when you do a problem in the homework on the Wiley Plus, maybe they might not give you the 30,000. So if you have all of the information except for the 30,000, then you can solve for the 30,000, right? Okay, so where do these numbers come from? Okay, so the numbers come from the information. So work in process March 1st. Okay, so how many physical units? These are physical units. Notice here, there's no percentages, no dollar signs, just physical units. How many physical units did we have at the beginning of March? So it says here, work in process March 1st, 20,000. Okay. So in step 1, we're not using any dollar sign, we're not using any percentages. How many units did they start working on in March? Well, it says units started into production, 30,000, right? So you can see that is going to be 30,000. And then also the information at the bottom is given to you as well. Let's take a look at step 2. So step 2 is just adding 3 new columns. Okay, so you can see that this information here on this side, basically this information is already the same as step 1. You can see step 1 here. Okay. And then now in step 2, we're going to add 3 new columns. Okay, so I want to point out something. These percentages are already given to you, right? So for example, we have 20,000 physical units at the beginning of March. What percent of the conversion cost were in there? See, it says conversion percentage. What percentage of the conversion costs were in there? it says in the problem 10%, right? 10%. Now, why is there no column for materials percent complete? Why would there not be a column for materials percent complete? The reason is because materials are always 100%. Now, look at this here. We have 40,000 units that are completed and transferred out. So if something is completed, like it's totally complete, totally done, what percentage of the conversion costs are going to be in there? It's 100%. And then finally, this 50% is given to us. Now, what you have to do is you can put an X at the top here. So you can put an X here at the top and only worry about the bottom part. This is the part that's very important, the bottom part. So the way to figure out the bottom part is we say we have 40,000 physical units. They have 100% of the conversion cost in them. So what's 40,000 times 100%? It's 40,000. Again, we have 40,000 physical units. They have 100% of the conversion costs in them. So how many equivalent units for conversion cost do we have? It's 40,000. This teal color, this blue color, is kind of tricky. At the end of the month, we have 10,000 physical units. And what percent of the materials are here? Hint. Remember, materials are always 100%. So 10,000 times 100% equals 10,000. How many equivalent units do you have for direct materials? 10,000. At the end of the month, we have 10,000 physical units, and they have 50%, 50% of the conversion cost. So what's 10,000 times 50%? It's 5,000. Okay, so you can see that they add these columns up and you get 50,000 and 45,000. Okay, here, what we're going to do is step 3. We're going to figure out how much it costs to make each individual unit. Okay, so now in step 3, we're starting to use dollar signs, dollar amounts. Okay, so it says begin a work in process March 1st. That's the beginning work in process. How much direct material cost did you have? Well, going back to the original information, work in process March 1st, how much direct material cost? It was 50,000, right? Okay, so in step 3, all of these numbers here in this box here, 50,000, 90,000, 7,200, 193,500, those are all given to you. What's 50,000 plus 90,000? It's 140,000. That's my total material cost to account for. What is 7,200 plus 193,500? It's 200,700. That's how much conversion cost I have to account for. And then this total I would just do last. Okay, so here we have $140,000 in material cost. How many equivalent units do we have for direct materials? Hint, look at step 2. How many equivalent units for direct materials? It's right here. Equivalent units, direct materials, total 50,000. So you see what we're doing here. We're taking $140,000 in materials, divided by, we have 50,000 equivalent units for materials. So if you do the math, you get $2.80. That means that each individual unit uses $2.80 worth of materials. Same thing with conversion cost. We have $200,700 of conversion cost. And how many equivalent units for conversion cost do we have? That comes from step 2. It's 45,000. So to make one fully completed unit, how much conversion cost do you have in one fully completed unit? It's $4.46. So how much does it cost to make one fully completed unit with materials and conversion cost, everything in it? It's $7.26. Now, this might look familiar, hopefully. You see this 140,000 divided by 50,000? And this 200,700 divided by 45,000? That actually is right here. See? Right here and right here. Same concept. Okay. So on page 3, you can see a depiction of what we're doing in step 3. Okay, so let's go back to step 3. Okay, so we finished this step. And now if somebody asks you, how much does it cost to make one unit? You can say, if I'm using process costing, it costs $7.26 to make one unit. Okay, so here we're going to be assigning the costs. Okay, so we have two parts here. We have cost of goods completed and transferred during March, and we have cost of the ending work in process. It says March 31st. That's the end. So how many units did you complete and transfer out? It says 40,000. Let me show you where the 40,000 comes from. It comes from here. How many units did you complete and transfer out? 40,000. Okay, it says the same number here too. It's 40,000. So 40,000 times how much does it cost to make one fully completed unit? $7.26. So how much did it cost to make the 40,000 units that were completed and transferred out? $290,400. Okay, the last step is the ending work in process. Now, the ending work in process you have to do in 2 steps here. So we have step 1, materials, direct materials. Step 2, conversion cost. How many equivalent units did you have left over for materials at the end? Let's take a look here. Okay, so March 31st is the end. At the end, we had the equivalent of 10,000 equivalent units for materials and 5,000 equivalent units for conversion cost. So we had 10,000 units for equivalent units in materials at the end, 5,000 equivalent units for conversion cost. How much material goes into each unit? $2.80, right? So the ending work in process consisted of 10,000 equivalent units for materials. There's $2.80 in materials for each unit, so that's 28,000. And how many equivalent units for conversion cost did you have at the end? It was 5,000. And how much conversion cost goes into each unit? You can see here how much conversion cost goes into each unit. It's $4.46. So what is the total conversion cost in my ending work in process on March 31st? $22,300. If you take the 28,000 plus 22,300, you get 50,300. Then you take 290,400 plus 50,300, and you get the total, which is 340,700. Okay. I want to point out something else. 340,700. That's called total costs accounted for. Let's go back up here. How much do you have for total costs to account for? Same number, 340,700. Okay, so for chapter 16, just make sure you know these concepts that I went over. And know that the production cost report, those are the 4 steps we did. Together, all 4 steps, that's the production cost report. The 4 steps are, number 1, physical units, number 2, equivalent units, number 3, unit cost, and number 4, assign the cost. If you have any questions, please let me know, and this concludes the Chapter 16 lecture notes.